Okay, we're going to begin our presentation. I'd like to welcome everyone to the ISO 9001-2015 Critical Points of Review During the Transition Audit Process webinar. My name is Joseph Krolikowski, and I am the Technical Director of Perry Johnson Registrars. Couple of technical notes. All participants are in mute. However, we do want to answer your questions. And so I do invite you to use the question portion of the dashboard. We will make time for your questions at the conclusion of our presentation. An overview of our topics for today. We're going to discuss the approach to the transition that PJR is going to be taking. We'll be discussing the projected amount of additional audit time needed. We're going to have an in-depth review of new audit content, a summary of how the audit to 9001-2015 will differ from 9001-2008, and also how it will be the same. We'll have some concluding remarks, and then we will take your questions. In terms of how the transition is going to be handled, PJR recognizes that our clients are going to have different needs in terms of the timing on their transition. Some of you have been working on a transition process for some time. Perhaps you even purchased the draft or final draft copies of the standard when they were made available. And so you feel that you're ready now. For some of you, you may feel that you still need additional time. And accordingly, because we do visit all of our clients at least once a year, we do want to offer a transition process at any point in your certification cycle. So the preferred approach, obviously, is to transition as part of your recertification audit. This is the cleanest way to handle your transition. The recertification audit already includes additional audit time and obviously also comes with the issuance of a new certificate. Now, if you find yourself in the position of wanting to transition as part of your surveillance audit process, that can also be accommodated. We're prepared to do a transition audit as part of an annual surveillance audit, and in certain cases we are also prepared to do it as part of 2 consecutive semi-annual surveillance audits. So for example, if you are on a 6-month frequency and you choose to begin the transition process at surveillance audit number 2, it could be completed over surveillance number 2 and 3. Now, our preference is that it be done in one step, and we would certainly encourage you to do it in one step, but we are prepared to perform the transition in accordance with your request. Now, when the transition process is done during the surveillance audit, there is a small amount of additional audit time that's going to need to be added in most cases. We're going to be covering that in a couple of slides here. Now, in terms of your certificate, if you choose to transition during a surveillance audit, whether it be an annual or a semi-annual or 2 consecutive semi-annuals, you will be receiving a revised certificate. So let's go over how that would work on the next slide. Okay, now let's say that you had completed a certification audit in January of 2016. This would be, of course, either a recertification or a Stage 2 audit, and you chose to do that audit to ISO 9001-2008. So the certificate is then issued, and it bears the PJR certificate number. In this case, C2016-12345, bearing an issuance of January 15th, 2016, and an expiry of September 14th, 2018. Now, of course, that is due to the mandatory cutoff date that was established by the ISO for any ISO 9001-2008 certifications. After September 14th, 2018, ISO 9001-2008 will cease to be a viable standard. those certificates will simply be invalid. So that is why this certificate, as you can see, is abbreviated. It's not a full 3-year certificate. What would then happen then in step 2, you would complete your transition perhaps in early 2018. And this would then result in a revised certificate. Now you'll note again we've got the same root certificate number, C2016-12345, but you'll note that it now has a -R1. That stands for revision 1. The issue date is the same, 1/15/16, but the expiry date is now 1/14/19. This now reflects the full 3-year cycle of certification that you're accustomed to. So again, this is only going to be if you choose to do a transition over a surveillance audit where your certificate is currently 9001-2008 and you're looking to transition over a surveillance. In all likelihood, this will come up more in 2017 and 2018, but this is the approach that will be taken. Now, in terms of additional audit time, as part of our build-up for 9001-2015, our management team put a grid together for our internal staff. Now, the full measure of detail on that grid is, of course, confidential, but we can absolutely share the following details with you. Most of the average size companies are going to require an additional half-day of audit time. Now, of course, as I mentioned, that is on a surveillance audit. On a recertification audit, there's already additional audit time. There are, of course, going to be some companies that will be able to transition with no added audit time at all. If you are a current PJR client, I do invite you to get in touch with your scheduler or your sales representative for further information on what the approach will be in your particular case. We have put together a preliminary list of new items that are going to require verification during the transition audit. We're going to be going over these, and we're also going to share with you some ideas on how these items are going to be audited. And we'll begin with clause 4.1. 4.1 and 4.2 are very high-level items. There's some very important verbiage that's been introduced into the standard here. Starting with 4.1, where it states, has the organization implemented a process to determine, monitor, and review external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and strategic direction? Now, there's some key verbiage that's used here. First of all, strategic direction. We're going to actually put that one aside just for the moment. I do have an explanation on that term in a few slides here. But let's talk first about external and internal issues. This terminology is, of course, taken from Annex SL itself. This is terminology that is going to appear now in every single ISO publication. This is core text, if you will. And the idea is that as an organization, you are responsible for being cognizant of the issues that come from external areas. So, you know, some of your usual suspects here, customers, suppliers, owners, and so forth, but also the internal issues. You know, what are the challenges that are present in department-to-department communications? What are some of the challenges that are faced between employees and supervisors, and between the relationship between administrative and non-administrative staff, and so forth? So this terminology of external and internal issues, it's intended to be very broad, and it's intended to bring attention to the fact that as an organization, you have to be cognizant of what's going on within your quality system and how that affects what you are trying to achieve in terms of your overall purpose and strategic direction. Now, kind of furthering that idea, we have the in 4.2 we have our first mention of the term interested parties. Now, interested parties are a very broad term again, and very similar idea here. The whole idea of internal interested parties, external interested parties, and this bringing into the mix a wide variety of influences, not just customers and suppliers, but owners, unions, bankers, competitors, and so forth. Now, in terms of how 4.1 and 4.2 are going to be audited, the anticipated amount of audit time for these topics is fairly minimal. For most companies, there are already processes in place to stay on top of what's going on, right? We have things like management review, we have management level meetings, we have review processes in place. These are things that help us stay aware of what's going on inside and outside of the organization. Additionally, under 4.2, it states that you need to have a process to monitor and review information about the interested parties and identify what their requirements are. So how do we inbound requirements from outside, in particular from interested parties? We are already looking at contractual processes. We are already looking at design processes. This is very likely going to be the approach that we will take in the audit assessment of these clauses. What's important for you as an organization with these couple of early clauses is to get your hands around who are your interested parties, who are the relevant interested parties. That's the verbiage that's used in these early sections here. Who are the parties that are relevant to your quality management system? So you need to be able to get your hands around it and say, okay, these are the interested parties that influence my organization, and here is how I stay on top of what is going on with those interested parties and respond to them and so forth. Continuing then with section 4.3, we have some new verbiage pertaining to the scope statement. You've always been required to have an identified scope of your quality management system, but now we have added to this, is the scope statement appropriate and accurate? And does it take into account, and here's those things again, the internal and external issues, the needs of the interested parties, and does it reflect the products and services of the organization? Now, we have, for many, many years, been in the practice of reviewing the scope of the system, and we do it at every audit. We've now added a question to our audit report that directs our auditor to assess the adequacy of the scope statement. Interestingly, in 4.3, they've added some verbiage that opens the door to an exemption being sought from any requirement of the standard, not just those from product realization. Now, obviously, in 9001-2008, the terminology that is used is permissible exclusions, and permissible exclusions were limited to Section 7. Now, in terms of how this will work in practice, by the book, anything in the standard can be claimed for exemption. However, the critical thing that comes into play here is, can you show that you have effectively met the requirements of the standard? For example, you could say, well, we're not going to perform a management review process. We're not going to perform internal audits. We're going to claim exemption on those items. Well, the challenge to that would be, well, then how can you meet all of these other requirements in terms of effectiveness and the needs of your interested parties and being cognizant of issues and so forth? So For the most part, the clauses that will be claimed for exemption are going to be primarily those in Section 8. There are a couple in Section 7. For example, calibration is now found in Section 7. But for the most part, this will be a Section 8 exclusive item. And in terms of the auditing of this, it'll be very, very similar to how we currently audit permissible exclusions. Turning our attention then to Section 5, there's some very strong verbiage that's used in under the heading of leadership. And this first item here under 511A is especially intriguing. Has management demonstrated that it has taken accountability of the effectiveness of the quality management system? Now, we're going to be covering in just a couple of slides here the fact that there is no longer a management representative called out in the standard. But let's take a moment just to consider the impact of this clause here. The idea is that the leadership team is supposed to own it, if you will, in terms of the quality management system. It's their system. And therefore that means that it's on them in terms of if the system is effective or not effective. So what we've done in this is we've approached this in a couple of ways. We've modified our audit report just a bit to direct the auditor to confirm, is management a participant in the system? And we've also, and we'll discuss this a little bit later in the presentation, we've also added a new section that specifies a more elaborate interview with the leadership team. So again, we'll revisit that in just a few minutes here. Has management assured that the quality policy and objectives are compatible with the strategic direction of the company? Okay, I promised earlier we would talk about strategic direction, and I am a man of my word. Strategic direction is an interesting phrase. It actually does not get an official definition. It does not get a definition within ISO 9001, nor within ISO 9000, which is intriguing. So what we have for this term are some interpretations that have been provided by some high-level folks, including members of the TC 176 committee itself. And the current general consensus on this term is that it relates to the organization's vision of where they want to be. Mission, vision, these are terms that are used to lend some clarity to this term. And the big picture is that your quality system does not exist for the sake of existing, right? It's supposed to accomplish some things. It's supposed to be a positive contributor to your organization. This is why we have goals established. This is why we have key performance indicators. So the idea is that you should, through the achievement of your goals, through the improvements that you're realizing, these should contribute in a positive way to the achievement of the larger mission of the organization. So where are we going to be looking for this? Well, we're going to be reviewing management review. We're going to be reviewing business plan minutes. We're going to be talking to leadership. This is very much, it's a high-level item. How do we keep an eye on the future? How do we keep an eye on what our trajectory is as an organization? 511 also has a statement that we need to ensure that the quality management system requirements have been integrated into business processes. Now, initially, when this terminology was made public, there was some fear, some worry that this was going to mean somehow that ISO 9001 auditors were going to start digging into accounting practices and so forth. And I want to assuage some of those concerns. First of all, accounting is still hands-off in the audit process. We're not going to be digging into your ledgers. We're not going to be digging into your budgets and things of this nature. What we are going to be looking to see as a fulfillment of this requirement, you think about documentation controls. You think about record retention practices. Even something as straightforward as ensuring that people within business processes are competent. These are all activities that are kind of universal to a company, right? We want to make sure that we're working with current documents. We want to make sure that records are retrievable, whether they are business records or quality records. And we want to make sure that we have confidence in the competency of the people that are doing these practices. So this is, we feel, what the standard is intending by this clause here, by 511C. Moving on to 5.2, kind of an interesting item here. Has the organization ensured that the quality policy is available to all relevant interested parties? I actually had a discussion just recently with one of our clients, and he asked what I thought was an intriguing question. He said, does the standard mean for me to mail a copy to every one of my customers? And I said, no, that's not at all what's intended here. The terminology is deliberately open to interpretation, so available, making it available. We have concluded that making your quality policy available could include posting it in your front entryway. It could include listing it on your website. Any one of these types of open approaches to the visibility of the quality policy would be an appropriate fulfillment of this requirement. Mentioned this a little bit earlier in 5.3. We have a statement, has management taken on the responsibility of the quality management system? Now, again, this was formerly the purview of the management representative. Now, there's a little bit of disagreement on this, I think. The verbiage that's actually used by the standard is a little bit complicated, and what it says is essentially, has management ensured that these responsibilities have been assigned, that they've been communicated, that they've been understood? From our vantage point, it's very difficult to separate what 5.3 is stating from what we looked at a few slides ago under 511A, and that is that you cannot assign all of this to one party and somehow still be making yourself accountable for the performance of the system. And again, it's telling, really, that there is no longer any mention of a management representative in the standard to begin with. That is very telling. However, all of that being understood, the standard is not saying that you can't have a key contact, that you can't have a coordinator. That isn't the intent whatsoever. These things are still appropriate. If you have somebody that is the designated contact for the auditors, somebody that is the coordinator of the management review meeting, somebody that manages the corrective action database, all of these things are fine so long as it is a coordination role and not a case of the person is doing all of the work themselves. That, even under 9001-2008, that was never the intent behind the appointing of a management representative. Has top management established a means to monitor if processes are delivering intended outputs? Now, we've already got a fairly extensive review of KPIs and objectives in our audit report. And our interpretation on this is that for most organizations, fulfilling this requirement is going to be rooted in the meeting of your objectives. Turning our attention then to 6.1, this is of course where we find the primary placeholder for the risk requirement, risk-based thinking. I want to emphasize here that a formal process for risk management or risk-based thinking is not required. In fact, the writers of the standard were so concerned about this, they actually wrote it right into the annex that you don't have to have a formal process for this. I've made the point in my other presentations that risk-based thinking as an idea has long existed in ISO 9001. You know, if you look at things like management review, contractual review, training, preventive action, these are all disciplines that are very much rooted in risk management, in risk-based thinking. Now, for our part, what we've done is we've added a question to our audit report. And essentially, we've told our auditors, go in with an open mind and ask the question, what are you doing to make risk-based thinking part of your quality management system? How have you integrated this into your existing processes? So as auditees, you're going to need to be prepared to explain how you incorporate risk-based thinking into what you do. Now, again, this may very well be no change whatsoever to what you're doing. You know, identifying concerns and before they happen, potential concerns, and taking action therein. So again, we're going into this with a very open mind and a very open approach. Then again, here we continue with 6.1.2. Once you have identified the risks, what are you doing about it? And again, very similar to past approaches on this. Under quality objectives, which appear under 6.2.1, a little bit of a tweak to the requirement. They now are stating that we need to ensure that quality objectives are relevant to the conformity of products and that they enhance customer satisfaction. Now, our interpretation on this is not to say that you can't choose the objectives you want, but you have to have a sufficient number of objectives that this relevancy to conformity of products and enhancement of customer satisfaction is upheld. And you need to cover the processes of your quality management system by the objectives that you choose. Now, our assessment of objectives is going to be the same as it's been in the past. We are still going to have a section within our audit report where they will be specifically listed, and they will be assessed as part of that process. Now, in addition, under this clause, you're now required, again, this is not terribly different from what was required before, but you are now specifically required to assign resources, identify responsible parties, have a timeline, and have evaluation practices in place. For most of the organizations, this is already being done. It's just now a little more specifically required by the standard. Our assessment methods for this will be unchanged. Turning our attention then to Section 7. Some interesting items in here. Most interesting is organizational knowledge. This is another Annex SL term that has been brought into the 9001 standard. Let's begin with just kind of an understanding of what organizational knowledge is all about. It is knowledge that is specific to the organization gained through experience. You know, we all have people in our organizations that are invaluable, that are irreplaceable, people that have done their tasks for many years, people that have built up over a lifetime knowledge about how certain processes work, how certain things are supposed to be done, and so forth. Now, what the standard is saying is obviously we can't just flip a switch and replace someone if they choose to no longer come to work one day or what have you, but you do have to have processes in place to attempt to retain that organizational knowledge. So what might this manifest in? Well, we would look at training methods. We would look at what you've documented in work instructions, in production controls, and so forth. If somebody in your organization knows a better way to complete an inspection process, perhaps your inspection documentation needs to be enhanced to reflect that approach. I mean, some of this is just good common sense, but again, the terminology is in the standard to get you thinking about how do you approach this. Now, the other aspect to organizational knowledge is learning from the past, learning from mistakes. With this, we can draw some parallels to corrective action, to customer complaint resolution, and say, okay, when things go wrong, when there are issues, we are capable of learning from these issues and improving our processes as a result. Now, the last aspect of organizational knowledge has to do with readiness for the future. And in this respect, it's forward-looking, and it says, okay, I am currently meeting a certain expectation of competency. What can I do to ensure that I'm ready for what's coming? How do I even know what's coming down the road? And how do I prepare for it? So our methods for assessing competency are going to be unchanged. This requirement is going to manifest to an extent in the competency records, but it's also going to manifest in meeting notes and things of this nature. Turning our attention then to Section 8, there's a couple of interesting items that have been added to the design input requirement. So let's go over these now. They're over 2 slides here. If the organization is responsible for the design of its products, do the inputs include standards and/or codes of practice that the organization has committed to implement? Very interesting idea. If there are standards and codes of practice, how do you incorporate that into the design activity? Now let's have a look at the other new input. Again, if the organization is responsible for the design of its products, do the inputs to design include consideration of potential consequences of failure due to the nature of products or services? Now here, obviously, this is going to be tempered a bit by what it is that you're designing. If what you're designing is an end-user product, you may have a lot of consideration to take in terms of consequences of failure. Some of what has been mentioned as being applicable here are things like safety, financial fallout, and so forth. Now obviously, for those of you on the call today that design products, you know these things better than anybody. The standard is putting these things in here so that we as auditors are prompted to ask about it, right? What are the potential consequences? What are the standards and codes of practices that you've committed to? Did you consider these things when you designed this product? Was that a part of the design consideration? Moving on to 8.4, has the organization established a method to communicate its intent in control and monitoring of external provider performance to external providers? Now, you've been required for some time now to monitor external provider performance. Supplier reevaluation is mentioned in the standard as a mandatory activity. What's different now, what has changed now, is that you need to have some transparency with your supply base on how you're going to do this, how you're going to monitor them. And obviously, we have a number of ways that we communicate with external providers. You can think about purchase orders, contractual documents. You might even think in terms of your terms and conditions, what's specified on your website, things of this nature. But you are now required to share this information with your external providers. Also in the area of external providers, but in a different clause, have controls been established for external provider property, where ownership does not transfer to the organization? Now, the standard has, for a long time, had requirements on customer property. Used to be called customer supplied product even, if you go back to the 1994 version of the standard. This has now been expanded to external providers. And there are a number of scenarios where this would apply. The one that I use to kind of put the idea across. Let's say that you have a need to establish a paint booth in your organization, a powder coating paint booth. And because of the high cost involved, you contract with a paint supplier and they build a paint booth in your facility. But because of the cost involved, they retain ownership of that booth. They stock the booth with the paint, but the booth and everything in it, other than your product, is owned by the external provider. That is an example of external provider property. Now, in terms of what are we going to be assessing, it's going to be very similar to what we look at for customer property. Do you have a way to demonstrate or document ownership on external provider property? Do you have a process in place to communicate issues to external providers? Again, very similar to what we're doing now when we assess customer property controls. Have controls for the expanded list of post-delivery activities been established? Now, post-delivery activities are defined in Section 855 now. And there's a handful of things that have been listed in terms of influencing it, but in terms of what those post-delivery activities are, they've left the door very open. There is a note, and the note talks about warranty provisions, maintenance services, recycling, final disposal, and so forth. But that's not intended to be an all-encompassing list. We have had some clients that have raised questions about should this be claimed as a non-applicable. Well, it certainly can be claimed as a non-applicable, but we have to consider what is it that could happen post-delivery. Do you offer to assist with nonconformity that becomes apparent after the customer is using the product? Do you respond to customer complaints on the product? Do you honor replacement arrangements per the terms and conditions of your contract, and so forth? So 855 for the most part directs you to consider what are the requirements of your customer, what is the feedback of your customer, how do you put all of these things together so that you are serving the affected interested parties in a post-delivery situation. Has the organization determined a process for responding to unplanned changes in such a way that conformity with requirements is maintained? 856 is an interesting clause. It's called control of changes, and it states that where changes occur, you need to review and control those changes. For most organizations, change is not a linear process, right? For a lot of companies, when change happens, it is something that challenges the system, challenges your ability to produce reliable products and so forth. What the standard is basically saying is, to the extent possible, you need to control changes when they occur within your system. And additionally, you have to have retained documented information. That's ISO 9001:2015 speak for records. You have to have records about the changes, who authorized the change, and actions arising from the changes. And so what kind of changes are they talking about here? What are these changes that they are referring to? Well, there's a number of directions that you can go with this, but some of the obvious ones that come to mind. If you change your manufacturing process, if you change the inspection techniques, if you change the manner in which you are transporting product within the organization, if you change the approach that you take in the reviewing of requirements and so forth. When you change an aspect of your quality management system, do you have a way to review that change, control that change, and make sure that it's carried out in the manner that it's intended, right? Sometimes we want to change something. We have a kind of a picture in our mind of how the change is going to be done, but it doesn't quite get there. And as a result, that can lead to problems. So the standard is taking a very kind of specific view of this and saying, we know that things change within a quality management system. We're not saying that things can't change. In fact, they should change if you're going to realize continual improvement, among other things. But it cannot be something where you're falling down the stairs and landing on your feet, if I can use a little phrase there. Okay, let's turn our attention then to Section 9. A couple of items here that pertain to management review. We've actually got 3 slides here that all kind of hit on the same general idea, and that is how do we have these new requirements here? What are we going to be looking for? Well, the management review requirement, you'll be pleased to hear, has all of the same discussion topics that it had before, plus 3. So what are these 3 new items? Well, we have to ensure that we're discussing internal and external issues, including the effect on the strategic direction of the company. We have to ensure that management review is including a discussion of external provider performance, and we have to ensure that the management review is including an assessment of risk management activity. Now, in terms of the approach on this, from an auditor's perspective, exactly the same. And what we're going to accept from you will be exactly the same. I'm sure there are folks on the call today whose habit has been to have an annual management review. I'm sure some of you are in the practice of having a meeting every month, maybe a very short meeting where you cover 1 or 2 necessary topics and then you move on. All of these approaches to the requirement are going to continue to be acceptable. You just need to be cognizant of these 3 new input items. Okay, that's it for new clausal content. Let's go over now the differences, how the audit's going to feel different in going from 2015 or 2008 rather, to 2015. We have concluded that for most companies, the difference between a 9001 2015 and a 9001 2008 audit is going to be minimal. It's going to be manageable. The key differences are these three: the expanded role of leadership, the impact of risk-based thinking, and the elimination of previously required documentation. Now let's go over these in some more detail. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to, as part of the 2015 audit, we are going to have an expanded discussion with the leadership team. We've actually put a four-part question in the audit report that is intended to be a discussion between the auditor and the leadership team, whoever that happens to be. We've even told our auditors, it probably makes sense for you to allocate time on your audit plan for this. Show the spot where you have sat down with the leadership team, or going to sit down with the leadership team. Our audit report has also been tweaked just a bit to ensure that the auditors are assessing leadership's involvement in the system, not just their ability to sit down with the auditor and answer a couple of questions, but also, are they participants in the system? In terms of risk management, it's been emphasized a number of times, but I'll state it again: you do not have to have a formal process for risk management. And so, our auditors are going to be asking a very open-ended question. What is your approach to risk management? How do you incorporate risk-based thinking into your processes? And the ball will kind of be in your court in terms of, how did we do this? How did we incorporate risk-based thinking into what we do? Again, I want to emphasize that there's a number of things you're already doing in 9001-2008 that are risk-based thinking in nature. Things like preventive action, competency, reviewing customer requirements, and so forth. These are all things that are very much risk-based thinking by their very nature. And no more preconceived expectations for documentation. Again, this has been covered extensively, but we'll restate it here. You are not required anymore to have a quality manual or procedures. Now, in terms of the practical aspects of the audit, the auditor cannot demand that you have a procedure for any particular topic, nor can they demand that you have a quality manual. However, there is obviously, if you choose to have one of these items, the content of it is still going to be subject to audit. That aspect of this has not changed. So be aware of that. I will hasten to add, however, the expectation is still very much that you will be able to show that your processes are consistent and your processes are effective. So you're going to need to be prepared to show how you've approached that. Now, I do want to bring a couple of other items into focus for you. As part of what's been going on for PJR recently, in addition to getting ready for ISO 9001-2015, we've also had to get ready for our transition to ISO 17021-2015. And there's some interesting new items that are going to impact the audit process that are coming from 17021. First of all, we have been directed now to include the review of statutory and regulatory requirements within the audit process. Now, this is across all scopes. Accordingly, we've actually added a portion of the audit report to record the results of these assessments. Now, for some organizations, probably a lot of organizations, there will be minimal impact felt by this. For others, it will be significant. It's going to depend on the applicability of statutory and regulatory requirements to your particular organization. Additionally, the auditors are now being specifically directed to comment on the level of adherence to the spirit of the IAF Expected Outcomes publication. What is that, you're asking? Well, what the IAF Expected Outcomes document is, it's a publication from 2012 by the International Accreditation Forum. I've provided a link here at the bottom of the page. It's a series of key ideas that pertain to the larger picture of what a quality management system should mean for the organization that implements it. And it actually presents 9 key ideas. Is the quality management system suitable for the processes and products that it produces? Is there an analysis and understanding of customer needs and expectations? Is there specificity of product characteristics in order to meet the applicable requirements? Is there a management of processes to ensure that we're achieving expected outcomes? Are resources available? Are we monitoring and controlling product characteristics? Are we preventing nonconformances and taking appropriate action when nonconformance occurs? Are there effective processes for internal audits and management review? And is there an overall monitoring, measuring, and an attempt to continually improve the quality management system? As you can see, everything here is present within 9001-2008 and 9001-2015. But we are being directed to provide comment specifically on this now within the context of the audit report. In terms of how the audit to 9001-2015 will be the same, the key aspect of what we do when we audit you to ISO 9001 has always been that we assess processes. That's been the case for over 15 years, and we're still auditing processes. So we don't come in and say, okay, what are you doing for clause 7.4? What are you doing for clause 6.2? We come in and we say, what are your processes? How do you control your processes? That doesn't change in going from 9001-2008 to 9001-2015. We're still going to use the same techniques of auditing. We're still going to observe what you're doing. We're still going to interview people. We're still going to review documents and records. We're still going to need to learn about your process. We're still going to need to sample your process, and none of that is changing. We still have this expectation that you have fulfilled the requirements of the standard through the processes that you have established. In conclusion, we are ready to ensure that you have a smooth transition to ISO 9001-2015. We're confident that for the majority of our clients, this transition is going to proceed with minimal difference from past assessments, and that you will enjoy a host of benefits from the new standard. I do want to invite you to join us for one of our other webinars. We have ISO 9001-2015, Preparing for a Successful Transition. This is an overview of the development of the standard itself. We take a look at the timeline, the format and layout of the standard. We have some answers to some common questions that have been raised. The interaction of processes and its importance to a successful audit, that's also reviewed once a month. We take a look at what is a process, how do we correctly put together an interaction of processes. And premiering soon, we have a new webinar coming called What to Expect During Your Stage 1 Audit. That is under development at this time and is going to be premiering in a very short time. So do look for that one as well. And we do want to give you a chance to be informed of the latest news automatically. You can do that by visiting our website at www.pjr.com. If you go to the bottom of the page, enter your email address and click subscribe, you'll be automatically notified of news and events pertaining to the standards, upcoming webinars, and other points of information. I do thank you for your time today. I hope the presentation has been helpful. I'm going to go ahead and open the question portion of the dashboard and see if we have any questions today. We have several questions. Okay. Okay, we've got some questions on the getting copies of the presentation. We can absolutely get you a copy. It's going to be available for download in just a short time. The presentation itself is available for reviewing with voiceover in a short time as well. Mitchell Clendenin, I think is how that's said. I do hope I've got that right. Could a company choose to be audited against the 2008 standard as a recert in 2017 and then go through an upgraded audit in 2018? Yes, that can be accommodated, Mitchell, depending on how late in the year it takes place. I would invite you to get in touch with your scheduler or salesperson for specific details on that. Rick Corcoran asks, how do we cut off 2008 and begin 2015 in our organization? Can we run both systems simultaneously until there is a clean-cut point? Yes, absolutely you can. Again, Rick, I would emphasize that remember that what makes up the system is unchanged, right? This is still your processes. These are still your activities. So if you've implemented the new items and so forth, there shouldn't be any reason that you would have to run two systems simultaneously. But absolutely, that can be done if necessary. Okay, Samantha Berg asks, internal issues, can you give an example? Are you referring to whether they work well together? Well, Samantha, there's obviously a number of things we can look at that are examples of external issues. But if I could give you one example that comes to mind just off the top of my head, what is the effectiveness of communication between the management team and the production team as it pertains to the performance of the manufacturing process and management's expectations? Is there an effective line of communication? So it's not so much are they working well together, are the methods for communication effective? You know, it's very much one thing to say something, but if the person you're saying it to doesn't understand what you're saying, that represents a challenge. That represents potentially an issue that could affect your quality system. Samantha Berg also asks, so will you be auditing accounting? If your internal auditor audits the accounting, can they no longer be our auditor? Samantha, again, we're not going to be auditing the nuances of the accounting practice itself. The new requirement is that aspects of the quality system are included in business processes. So again, things like revision control on documents and competency records for personnel. I don't personally see any reason that a member of accounting could not be a participant in the internal audit process. Okay. Bronco Lobo asks, would it be allowed to ask about planned investments or business plans to better understand as auditor the strategic direction of the organization? I don't believe that would be necessarily, I mean, it would depend greatly, I think, on the context of the discussion and how that was presented. To ask outright, well, what are you planning to invest in? What are your business plans? I don't think that's appropriate, and I don't think that's the intent of including strategic direction within the requirements of the standard. Samantha Berg also asks, how are you going to have us prove that we tell our external providers the information in Clause 8? Well, interesting question, and the requirements, again, this is spelled out in 8.4.3 under information for external providers. The methodology is up to you. We just need to be able to confirm that you have met this requirement. Bronco Lobo also asks, when we talk about control of changes, does it affect the control of design and development changes? And you then provide correctly a clausal reference in 8.3.6. In this context, Bronco, I would say that the requirements in 8.3.6 for design are more specific and more pressing than the requirements in 8.5.6. Okay. Samantha Berg asks, reviewing customer requirements meaning customer orders. I don't fully understand the context of your question, Samantha, but yes, customer orders would be a potential place to learn about what customer requirements have been established. Douglas Fritz asks, please explain if there is a difference between continuous improvement and risk management in nature. Yes, I would say that Douglas, there is an inherent difference between the two terms, but there is absolutely a shared ideology. There's absolutely a shared longer-term goal. Risk management, by its very nature, strives for improvement of the quality system. So, if there is absolutely a difference, one is rooted in kind of the larger idea of improving the quality system. One is thinking more about what are the issues, potential issues, and how do I plan for and avoid those items. Okay. Rachel Oliver asks, what terms will be used as far as continual improvements, preventive actions, or process improvements? Well, Rachel, what's important to remember about terminology in the context of the standard is that the standard is very open in terms of the terminology that you use within your system. In fact, there's an annex that even says you don't have to use the terminology that's presented in the standard. If you're comfortable calling them suppliers, keep calling them suppliers. You don't have to suddenly start referring to them as external providers. If you are comfortable looking at your risk-based thinking partially through the context of a preventive action program, then keep calling it preventive action. Okay, Samantha Berg asks, will the improvement you discussed about ISO 17021, I think you meant ISO 17021, will it be required for ISO 9001:2015? Samantha, the requirements that are imposed on the certification bodies from 17021 are universal. Those are going to be mandatory regardless of what scope is being pursued. So yes, we will absolutely be assessing statutory, regulatory, and the IAF expected outcomes, regardless, and that's going to be the case for any certification body. Samantha Berg asks, do you offer a copy of 9001:2015? No, we do not. That does need to be purchased directly from the ISO itself. That can be obtained at www.iso.org. Okay. Wilbert Vivas, I believe, asks, In section 5.3, can responsibilities be delegated? You got to be careful about how you approach this, Wilbert. You've got to be very careful, because it's impossible to look at 5.3 and not at the same time look at 5.1.1 A, where it says that management has to make itself accountable for the effectiveness of the system. So can responsibilities be delegated, some of the minutia of the system? Yes, but management cannot just say, okay, this isn't my problem, I'm going to put all this on the quality department. That is what they are trying to eliminate with this verbiage. Management cannot extract itself from the process. Management has to participate in the dealings of the system. We would expect to see them in management review. We would expect to see them participating in the corrective action process. We would expect to see them pitching in to resolve customer complaints and so forth. Okay, Mike Arigioni, again, I do apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correct. You will be asking organizations what are they doing for risk-based thinking, risk management. What will be acceptable to the auditor? Mike, it's a very, very wide open field of what we're going to accept. It really, the onus is on the organization to explain how you have incorporated risk-based thinking into your processes. How do you incorporate risk-based thinking? Again, remember, we're not required to have a formal system. So, if companies come to us and say that our system is made up of a preventive action program, we are incorporating this into our competency activity, into our contractual review, our design reviews, and so forth. All of these taken together are an effective strategy. What I would advise you is, don't think of this as one additional thing that you're doing within your system. Think of this as a multiple layered strategy. That's the larger picture here. Jeff Conklin asks, is there a complete ISO 9001-2015 training presentation available to us? Jeff, we do actually have an expanded ISO 9001 transition training course. It's available on our website. It is free. If you go to www.pjr.com and click on the training link, you'll find all the information you need on that item. Okay. Jeff Conklin also asks, my shop is prototype and appliance and aerospace. Can we take exception to the portion of our business that does not require ISO 9001-2015? Jeff, you are allowed to have a narrowly defined scope of your system. There are some nuance requirements that go into that, but in short, it can be done depending on if it's approached correctly. Okay, Samantha Berg asks, can you provide an example of how we measure or evaluate effective communication between, you say, external providers? Okay. Again, as I've mentioned now, we would be looking at things like purchase orders, terms and conditions, websites, and so forth. How do you make that information available? Okay. Frank Shikari asks, regarding risk management, the company should recognize and evaluate the risks, and their technique is not our concern. Is that right? Okay. Fred, I think you're asking that from the perspective of the auditor. We have to maintain an open mind in terms of the approach. And the aspects of that, yes, we do have to maintain an open mind. We have to be prepared to assess what is given to us as the approach. Okay, Doug Fritz has provided a clarification on his comment. Continual improvement versus risk, Poka-Yoke versus FEMA. I would agree. As I said, there's aspects of continual improvement and risk management that are distinct, but I think in general they share kind of a shared ideal. Raymond Sharkey asks, how will an auditor determine if we have addressed relevant statutory and regulatory requirements? Well, Raymond, in terms of assessing relevancy of requirements, our approach is going to be the same as with every other requirement. We're going to sample. We're going to review what has been communicated to you via your customers. Some of these requirements are going to be passed down through your customers, so we'll be looking at contracts, orders, and so forth. Some of this we're going to be looking at internal requirements. We're going to be looking at what you've established on your work orders, on your procedures, and so forth. As I said, it is possible, and in some cases likely, that there are going to be no relevant applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. Mike Argioni asks, how do you think internal audits need to differ from present, considering Clause 5? Mike, in terms of the approach that is taken on internal audits, we foresee no difference in approach. Internal audits should absolutely be process-based. They should absolutely be objective. It's a modified set of requirements, but the methodology for internal audits should be no different. Samantha Berg with a clarification on her earlier question. Can you provide an example of how we measure effective communication between internal providers? I think you meant internal interested parties. Samantha, again, I gave that as an example in terms of potential internal issues. We're not going to presume anything when we come in to do our assessments. We are going to see, okay, is there an awareness of internal issues? The primary place that we're going to be looking for that, quite frankly, is going to be your management review activity, because you're required to discuss internal issues therein. If there are none, there are none, and we're willing to accept that if that is the case. Now, if, on the other hand, we are seeing evidence of management discussion on issues in production, and we find that there is no communication to production, and production is unaware, things are supposed to be changing and they're not changing, that's going to raise some concerns and some red flags for us on what the approach has been. Okay, Fred Shikari asks, because there is no management rep, can we internal audit during the management interview or somewhere else? Fred, the requirements for leadership and internal audit are distinct, but that is not to say that they can't be audited in the same place. Okay, Jean DeRoy asks, did I get this right? Documented procedures are not mandatory, but you have to be able to show evidence that new requirements are incorporated into the process. What documentation may be helpful? Maybe a quality plan to assure the new requirements are incorporated. Well, Jean, if I may, I'll refer you to the IAF mandatory document number 9, where it states that the ideal approach to transitioning should include a gap list. It should include a gap list with assigned responsibility. Now, having said that, you can absolutely approach the transition in whatever way you see fit, as long as the requirements are being upheld. But yes, procedures are no longer required. Okay, Dennis Marinsik asks, can PJR clients use a clause-based internal audit versus a process-based internal audit? I know PJR must use process approach. I've been told that it is the client's option to use a clause-based approach. Dennis, I do apologize if that is information that you were given previously. A clausal approach to the internal audit process is not in keeping with the requirement as written in 9001-2015 or 9001-2008. A clausal approach ignores, in most cases, the processes that have been established for the system. And the requirement that's written in the standard is that you have to assess the quality management system. The quality management system is made up of processes. Any further questions? Rachel Oliver asks, does PJR have an audit report that can be shared? I'm afraid we do not. If you are not a current PJR client, the content of our audit report is an item that there's copyright on. Okay, thank you all for your time. Have a great day.